Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of Three Guys in the Word. It's good to be with you once again. My name is Andrew Omer, and as always, joining me is Eric Parker and Chris Miller, fellow evangelists in the Louisville, Kentucky area. It's great to be able to almost be finished with Ecclesiastes. We're in our last chapter. Lord willing, we'll finish that next week, and then 2 weeks from today, we'll be starting something new. So, looking forward to that. We hope that what we've talked about so far has been stimulating and getting you to think. I know it's getting at least myself to think more about this section of scripture. Hopefully, I think from what discussions that we've held, it's really gotten all of us to really consider more deeply this part of the scriptures. It's been, as always, I really value this time together, and it's great to be able to dig in and discuss deeply what the Word of God has to say. But having said all that, it's great to be with you all, Chris and Eric, once again. And just as we always do, just see how things are going. Chris, how are things going with you?
Going good. We had our best attendance we've had since I've been at Shively this past Sunday. So that's pretty exciting. We had a young adults class we started downstairs. It's me and Kate, uh, a young guy that's maybe in his 20s, and then two high school students. So that's been a good study. We went through Jonah the last 2 weeks. So I kind of feel renewed in a sense. Got like a pep in my step a little bit. It's growth is a good thing. Some people don't like change. To me, I think it's a real big blessing. So excited about that. Had my 40th class in the Messianic prophecies last night. So almost a whole year through that. And still quite a bit to go. But looking forward to our time together today. Like Andrew said, I've really gotten a lot out of the book of Ecclesiastes, really enjoyed looking at it. It's challenged me in a number of ways to maybe view things a little bit differently than I have in the past. So looking forward to our discussion today. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing all right. Of course, we lost a friend this past week. Christian who struggled with some things. Uh, so that's kind of weighing on my mind some. Um, but we got to keep encouraging one another as long as it is called today, and keep pressing forward. And we're definitely, at the tail end of Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes' primary message is don't get stuck in things under the sun, because if you do, then you're missing out on um, anything of lasting and meaningful value. So, we're coming into the last chapter, so I'm really excited about that. Excited to wrap up this part of our journey together, guys.
Well, as a reminder to those that may or may not have seen any of our videos on Ecclesiastes, we have those up, and we encourage you to watch them and to meditate on those. But we have had uh, a couple of verses from Romans 10 as our principal verses to kind of center our thoughts. Comes from Romans 10, verses 14 and 15, which read, how then will they call on him in whom they have not heard? Or okay, let me start over. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? How will they preach unless they are sent? Just as written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news of good things. So that's just a good reminder of why we are doing what we are doing. Hopefully, we are presenting uh, the scriptures as approved workmen, not ashamed. And what we like to do also is just to kind of give a little bit of some thoughts of what we talked about last time. Uh, Chris, just what were a few thoughts from what we discussed in chapter 11?
I think one word that kind of sticks out to me is the idea of being diligent. Uh, Solomon talks about that a lot throughout the book. But you talk about diligence, especially like Eric said, when you're uh, working for something that you can't really see yet, something that you can't really lay hold of. Our reward's not going to be realized till heaven. And I think there is a temptation to definitely, like Solomon did, try to go for things that you can lay hold of now and you can enjoy right now, but it won't satisfy you completely. And he's flirted with this idea all throughout the book of the under the sun premise. This may work, this may not work. Oh, this isn't working. This isn't helping me. Um, and there's just limits to it. I think that's another word I would use to kind of describe Ecclesiastes. Solomon reaches limits on things, limitations, things that we're told will satisfy don't. There's a limit on how much it will satisfy you and how much peace it'll give. Even to me in verse 5, where he talks about really kind of the limitations of your knowledge. Just because you're knowledgeable, it doesn't mean you're going to be happy. Just because you possess knowledge or you're an intelligent person doesn't mean you're going to find happiness. And he wrote Proverbs as well, which talks a lot about wisdom. Taking that wisdom, it's information you learn. I think that you apply it in a way that makes your life better. And under the sun, it may seem great, but when we all stand before God and have that appointment with God, we're going to have to answer for it. So it's important to be diligent, to take these things seriously. We don't know when we're going to breathe our last breath, but we also need to um, understand really what the ultimate goal is, to take these opportunities we have to enjoy the time that God gives us here, but to also, like he talks about at the end of chapter 11, to be prepared for what's coming. We're going to have to answer for all that we do, which is something that, like I said, that's one of the things that really kind of makes me think more so, that every action, every word, every thought, God's going to call those things into judgment. So I need to be really, really careful about what I'm doing with my time and my resources, because that appointment's coming. We're a few minutes closer than when we started to it. So the urgency and the diligence behind that's important to me. We got Eric.
Yeah, I think diligence is the perfect word. You've got this idea of you don't know all the variables. And so work hard and do what you can and sort of control what you can control, but also be aware of things that just happen, time and chance, that can bring about some changes, or somebody that maybe you trusted, maybe they turn their back on you, or, maybe you go through a health crisis, and you expected, to be on trajectory for something, and something kind of throws you off your trajectory for that. So be aware of that. And then as we're bridging into 11, or as we're bridging from chapter 11 to chapter 12, there's this kind of interesting contrast in the totality of life, where you've got the young man being discussed, and then you've got the older man being discussed. Of course, it's very metaphorical at the beginning of chapter 12, but even at the end of chapter 11, if a man should live many years, verse 8 says, let him rejoice in them all, because there's also many days of darkness. And so as you continue to age and grow, and you become more aware of some of the big challenges in life, and of course your body starts to break down, your friends start to die. There's just some negative things that happen in life. You see people who are very good mistreated. You see people who are very bad, seemingly above the law. You sort of see those things multiplied across your life, and it can make you kind of sour. It can make you kind of cynical. So he's saying, enjoy the good things as they come along too. And then he's going to talk about the young man. The young man that is naive is kind of like a negative connotation, but somebody who's just sort of innocent in the sense that they haven't seen all that sort of stuff. And so they have a very youthful optimism. They've got, almost like a consequence-free mentality. I think a lot of young people have that. I think probably any person whose age would say, when I was younger, I was kind of threw caution to the wind, sort of um, in our youth. And he's sort of saying, like enjoy that because it's very easy to become cynical over time. It's very easy to be swallowed up by the challenges of life. Um, but all the while, of course, he's directing us towards God, and he's saying whether you're young or old, if you focus on God, then you can rejoice in the good stuff, and you can rely on God in the bad times. And so you have that sort of stability that doesn't make you cynical, but it also doesn't make you naive either. And so a godliness which helps you to navigate both the charted waters and the uncharted waters. Andrew?
Well, toward the end there, it strikes a little bit more closer to home about impulsivity. And when you're young and quote unquote innocent, you throw caution to the wind. And a lot of times we think that we're still young at heart, but we're really not. So we have to be careful about like what we do. Just remember, as it's been mentioned, uh, that there will come a time that we're gonna have to answer for what we did and we didn't do, and that's going to really hit home at the end of 12. And we all should be make sure that not get caught up, enjoy life. We've echoed that over and over. I mean, Solomon says, have the right perspective of enjoyment. Don't take it to the extreme. That's a problem that we see nowadays. Everything's just without a limit. It's taken too far, and there's like no limitation. And it's gotten to that point, sadly. But I did like towards the beginning, it's got the idea of invest what you've been given wisely. Help others where you can, because you never know if something's gonna happen in your life where you might need assistance from others. So yeah, just overwhelmingly, just all these chapters, you get kind of sense that you got a guy who's sharing his life experiences, trying to tell his audience, I've experienced all these things. You could take my word for it. You can rely on me. I've seen the ups. I've seen the downs. I've lived a life of just throw caution to the wind. I've known what I should have done. I didn't do that, and so he's run the whole gamut. And at the end of the day, he's going to say, like, you know what? Living a life of without God, it's just not worth it. But we'll get into that more closer to the end of chapter 12. But it's all leading up to then. Well, let's look at the beginning of uh, this next section. And Chris, I'll just ask you to read verses 1 through 4, if you would.
Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them, while the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. In the days when the keepers of the house tremble, the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim, when the doors are shut in the streets, and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of music are brought low. I almost wonder to an extent, uh, especially verse 1, remember now your creators in the days of your creator in the days of your youth. So Solomon, when he becomes king, asks for wisdom, but he departs from it. I almost wonder if that's him dwelling on that, saying, don't make the same mistake that I made. Because while he was young when he became king, it seems like he departed pretty quickly as he became king over time. and as he's an older man potentially writing this, um, he stops and he's like, remember your creator in the days of your youth. Don't fall into the same trap that I did. And I think it's interesting. He acknowledges God as his creator too. So there's that acknowledgement of God, which a lot of times has lacked throughout the book. And it's interesting that he brings God up to close out the chapter, to close out the book. And then we figure out really kind of the solution to this whole thing. I just think that's interesting that he's brought up there. I think a lot of what he talks about in verses 2 through 4 is kind of, I would say, more so poetic language, I guess, the way I would read that. I think a lot of that describes the loss of things as you get older. The sun and the light, the moon, the stars are not darkened. I think a lot of that has to do with age, I think is what he's referencing in a lot of ways. Um, your hands and your arms kind of begin to tremble as you get older. That could be a reference as well. Uh, your teeth being lost. I think there's a lot of things that he mentions here that just as time happens, your body breaks down. And the sad part is, which thankfully, you can become a child of God at any age. As long as you have life, you have that opportunity. But I think all of us still, to an extent, no matter when we obey the gospel, we kind of sit back and we think, what if I would have done it a little bit sooner? What if I would have obeyed a little bit sooner? What if I'd have had a little more time as a child of God? How many more people could I have reached? And you think about it, we talked about this through the book. When you have ability and you have energy and you have life to an extent as a younger person, just statistically, you have more of an opportunity, more of a window to reach people, more than likely. I mean, obviously, things can happen. If you forget your creator, though, in the days of your youth, this is how I kind of thought of it. If you forget him in the days of your youth, how many people have you missed sharing that with? How many people have passed by you in your life that you've not shared the gospel with, that you've not talked about what God's done in your life? How many people did Solomon come in contact with throughout his time as a king, throughout his time living on this earth, that he wasn't able to share what God had done in his life? And I almost wonder if he sets back and thinks about those people and the opportunities he missed. You're not going to get any younger. None of us are, but we can take advantage of the time that we have now. And I think as he writes this book, if this is him writing it at an older age, that's the benefit, I think, a lot of times of older people. All three of us are younger. I love sitting and talking to older people because they have so much wisdom. And it's like Solomon's kind of like at this time, maybe he's like a dad's age or a grandpa's age. I don't know how old he was when he wrote this, but it's almost like sitting at his feet, being like, wow, that's amazing that you're sharing this information with me. So one day I can use it too and not make same mistakes. So, um, really poetic here. And I think really, no matter what age you are, you can kind of relate to this section. Because even at my age, I can't do things I could do a few years ago. So, it makes you stop and makes you think. Eric?
This is my soapbox moment. This is just another illustration of chapter divisions being abysmal. The end of chapter 11 is very clearly continuing here. This is all just one flowing thought. So this is, I think Ecclesiastes is famously terrible at the chapter divisions. Remember that chapter divisions were not added until like centuries and centuries after the New Testament was done. So that being said, we should think about God at all times in our lives. We have a tendency to only go to God when we're upset or when things are going bad. Solomon saying, even when things are good, you should be thinking about God. When you're young and impulsive and sort of innocent and uninformed about the nature of the world, you should direct your attention to God because you're going to get an education very quickly in the school of life. So, again, that idea of the tendency to become cynical. Older people do have much to offer, and we should revere the hoary head, as the Old Testament says. But at the same time, sometimes being around older people can be quite draining, because a lot of older people are very cynical and they're just kind of miserable. All they can talk about is just the pain and the sorrows and the anguish and the doctor's appointments, and like that, their whole life is just swallowed up with this. And again, their affect, their outlook on things is so cynical because of the experiences that they've had. Now, there's not all old people are like that, but a lot of older people are like that. And and I think in our country too, it's not even just the older people anymore. It's you spend time around middle-aged people, you spend time around younger people, and especially people that are making bad decisions. They're puffing on nicotine, and they're doing all these sorts of things, and they just feel flat exhausted, and their body just doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, and their brain doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And there's just a tendency to be very complacent and kind of ornery, and just miserable. So he's saying, in good times, think about God, because then when you're in the bad times, or when you're dealing with the perils of life and the tragedies of life and the difficulties of life, then you don't get completely swallowed up. You sort of got an anchor for yourself against those storms. And then, as Chris said, a couple verses here, just very metaphorical. The body's sort of starting to fall apart. And he's getting in this chapter to the whole of what we are, our whole purpose, our whole duty, what we should be doing with our whole life, whether we're young or old or anywhere in between. So you've got the knees and the hands shaking, and you've got the eyes growing dim, and you've got the ears kind of being stopped up, and you've got all these different challenges that are coming in time. And if you've thought about God in good times and in your youth, then perhaps it'll be easier in those difficult times to think about God when you start having these challenges. In my remarks a few moments ago was not to belittle the challenges that older people face in life. I think we're all kind of following that, and we're going to experience that. But I do think that outlook plays an important part in the way that we relate to one another, especially in our youth and in our old age. So I think outlook is a big part of this. And then, there's a few verses in here that do become kind of like, what exactly is he talking about? Verse 4, continuing in those metaphors, the sound of the grinding mill is low. It's the person who can't hear very much. And the daughters of song will sing softly. So you think about maybe like somebody in their youth who could really sing very well, or was a very capable singer. And then you think about how that changes over time. I'm not a huge like Mariah Carey fan. But I know that she had her heyday, right? I mean, she had her heyday where she could hit the high notes and she could do all kinds of different things. And you listen to her after like 25, 30, and plummets. Plummets. Now, that a lot of that's because of what Mariah Carey got involved in, but and some of the shenanigans that she got herself involved in. But that's kind of the idea here, that not only do we struggle to hear, but we also struggle to do things the way that we used to do them. Chris said he's not able to do some of the things that he used to be able to do. Some of us have maintained our youth a little better than that. But that's true for all of us. There's just things that you can't do like you used to be able to do. I used to be able to run really, really fast, and that's kind of weighing on me now. I'm a slow chug-a-lugger now. Even my fast mile time is not even close to what it used to be. So it's just part of life. And I think if you're thinking about God in the easier and the good times, then it's easier to think about God in the harder and the difficult times, in the bad times, in the evil days. Andrew?
Well, I was kind of pleasantly shocked when Chris mentioned that I was a young fella when he grouped all three of us. Maybe one person needs to get their eyesight checked. I'm trying to think that that's probably what Eric might have been thinking. Are you really serious calling him young?
That was
You're a young
flattering.
man. You're a young man.
Yeah, I know. Just being a little facetious. But
You're
yeah,
young compared to Methuselah.
yeah. If you haven't been watching these videos, I'm the old guy in the group, and I get pretty much pummeled on occasion for my elderliness. I just created probably a word there that just I'm trying to fit in with what we're talking about. But yeah, there's some things that now I can look back that, and I just when we see kids run around in the building and yeah, they have all that energy and it's like I don't even remember having that type of energy. It's like they just have that uh energizer bunny that idea. They keep going and going and going and I was like saying, did I ever do that? Because I don't feel like I could run a block without start like just keeling over. But when verse 1 made me think of what our deacon talked about last night in his invitation, very poignant. His message was he knows two men, and they responded in complete contrast to one another to difficult situation that is one could only imagine losing a spouse. They lost uh, their their wives, and one just pretty much shut themselves off to only do work, and that was pretty much it. They uh, devoid themselves to living, and ultimately their mind went. They did not find enjoyment. They did not deal with that loss. Um, they and I can't even begin to imagine losing part of yourself, your other half. I mean, you're gonna have that emptiness, and the other person. They decided, well, they're not going to allow that to um, destroy them, and they sought to serve. They went out and visited people. I mean, there's never going to be filling that hole. You're going to be missing. God obviously can get you through it. It's not going to be easy, but um, the other person used that instance as well, that they took that opportunity to not allow it to just defeat them. And so I couldn't remember if he said that the one had a great faith in God. The one who said, well, yeah, I have a great loss, but I'm still going to live. But you just see the stark contrast. And here you see uh, a stark contrast that Solomon and I get a sense as well. It's better to develop a relationship with God early in life. Seek that as soon as possible and get a strong relationship with God as soon as possible, because the days are eventually only going to get harder as the body just is slowly deteriorating. And when you have God to fall back on to help you during those difficult times where the muscles and the bones are not working as they used to, your senses are starting to wither, and you may not be able to uh, hear as you used to, speak as you used to speak, think as you used to think. And that could be very depressing. And those dark days can be, when you think about, not always, but when you get later on in age, you get that sense of loneliness. Um, and so when you have God to fall back on, there's a hope there. There's a you have something to look forward to. Um, we should always be looking ahead to that time, if we were faithful, that we'll always be with God. We don't have to worry about those um, failed body parts of like the knees, or just the joints not working as they should. We don't have to worry about getting a knee replaced, a hip replaced. Um, when we have that incorruptible body, we don't have to worry about the aches and pains, whether we'll have to get a hearing aid, or that our sight dims, where we'll have to uh, have surgery or have to wear glasses. And um, that'll be just a wonderful thing where will have energy, and just can't even begin to imagine what that heavenly body that awaits for those that have been faithful. All right, Eric, if you read verses 5 through 8.
Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caperberry is ineffective. For man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. Remember him before the silver cord is broken, and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Nice dismal note to remind us of the core theme of the book. Verse 5, there are challenges in life, and there are some things that sometimes people get worked up over that they shouldn't get worked up over. And there are some difficulties that you kind of have to keep moving and keep going through. And we can't sort of use the difficulties of life to become an excuse for us and prevent us from doing what is right. Or, as we kind of looked at chapter 11, if the clouds are full, you can be like, oh, I'm not going to do anything because it might rain. So you can't let those fears sort of dictate your life, or the challenges, the negative experiences of life to dictate how you act in the present, or how you're going to act in the future. And then we're really getting to the end where he's kind of using all these portraits, not only of the breakdown of the body, but just the sort of total finishing of the body, where you're getting to the end, and he uses some different metaphors that they were familiar with in ancient times. The silver cord is broken, the golden bowl's crushed, the pitcher by the well is shattered, the wheel to cistern is crushed. So you've got a lot of these sort of metaphors that they're going to be more familiar with back then. I'm going to talk about life coming to an end, life coming to the final hours. And God created us from dust. From dust we were taken, to dust we shall return. Sort of that mortality that we're talking about here, but then also the spirit returning to God. So you think of body and spirit here, kind of a twofold manifestation of who we are. There's other places that sometimes will make a kind of a threefold distinction between the body, soul, and spirit. Sometimes soul and spirit seem to be synonymous with one another. And sometimes there seems to be a little bit of a nuanced difference between them. And sometimes there seems almost to be more of a pronounced difference between them. But all in all, it is this idea of, we're from an under the sun perspective, we're just a composition of carbon and a few other elements. and that's just going to fall away, and the breath is going to expire. Even Jesus on the cross, when he breathed his last, it's this breath is going to stop going. That's one of the signals of death, is you see somebody stop breathing. But obviously, and then spirit and breath, for those who are not familiar from what we've talked about before, spirit and breath in Hebrew and in Greek are from the same words. So there is kind of an interesting parallel there, and what we're seeing there. I don't know that this is like the best text necessarily to create a whole understanding of death, but I think his point is saying that the body's going to break down, and it's just going to stop. Is there anything after that? Because if there is, then that should guide your life while your body's in the process of breaking down, not just after it's completely gone. That should guide your life and empower you, and that's really what he's going to get to, like at the very end, verses 9 through 13, or 14. So he's getting to this idea again. Under the sun, it's vanity of vanities. Your body's just going to break down. It's going to just go back to dust. Your skeletal remains will be in the ground or burned or whatever, and it's just going to be dust. So we got to be more than that. And especially, of course, illuminated by the New Testament, we're going to have a bodily resurrection where God's going to give us incorruptible bodies, and he's going to house our spirits in those incorruptible bodies. So it's, again, more information that we gain over time as the canon unravels and as Jesus comes into the picture more and more and becomes God incarnate. But for Solomon's perspective, if you're living for life under the sun, you're inevitably going to come to the conclusion that it's more than that, and better make that decision early on than later on. Again, as Chris pointed out earlier, you can become responsive to God at any point in life, but how much better to do that earlier than later? Chris?
Well, it's like he goes through here and he talks about all these problems, like we talked about with the body breaking down. Even he talks about desires fell at the end of, or near the end of verse 5. It's like at some point you just kind of lose purpose, you lose meaning. Think of like, obviously it's a sports analogy. A lot of times the rookie comes in or the young guy comes in, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to go, has all the desire in the world to do everything. And then once you get to a certain point, and whatever it is, whether it's your job, whether it's sports, whatever, you get to a point where you're comfortable, and then it's not as much of a desire. It's just something that it is. And life's kind of that way too. You think of being like a new convert. A lot of times people are really excited and they want to tell everybody about God. And then as you grow in your faith, sometimes you get, stagnant where it doesn't matter as much anymore. And Solomon at this point, you take the whole book, you take the book as a whole, there's so many different things that he has to go through and he talks about that he's been through. And it would crush your desire to look around and see how bad the world is, to see all the injustices that happen. If this is it, no wonder why you're crushed. No wonder why you would lose heart. But like Eric said, it goes beyond this life. Uh, as I said, it is tempting when you read Ecclesiastes, and we're Christians, but we're in the world too. We have to deal with people in the world all the time. We're tempted just like everyone else is. It's easy to just take what you can get now, that immediate fulfillment now, what you can have now. But it doesn't satisfy. And that's what he says. Man goes to his eternal home, one of two places. So you can't avoid that. That's all of us are on a pathway, either going to heaven to spend eternity with God or going to hell where we're apart from God for all eternity. Mourners go about in the streets. You think of that. You go to funerals, different things like that. People mourn. Um, one of the main things that I kind of get from this is every stage in life has a purpose and a meaning. As you get older, there's a purpose and a meaning behind it. In your younger age, there's a purpose and a meaning behind it. And in all reality, you read this, It even goes back to the beginning origin of man, like Eric pointed out with Adam. Adam was dust. God made him out of dust. He returns to the dust, his body does. If that happened with Adam and Eve, why am I exempt from that? I'm not. So all this is just dust. All this life is meaningful because of God. And apart from God, life loses to me all meaning and all purpose. But with God, there's a purpose and a meaning behind everything. And then you get to verse 8, like Eric said. How optimistic, Solomon. You started the book this way. How optimistic as we get to the end of it. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. All is meaningless. All is worthless. Now, I read that a little bit differently than I read it at the beginning of chapter 1, reading the book as a whole. There's mentions of God throughout. I would say vanity of vanities, all is vanity without God. But with God, there is all purpose and there is meaning. And Solomon kind of struggles through the book to find that. And I know we're going to talk more about it next week, but I can see myself in it a little bit. I can see the frustration sometimes. And I think from reading this, he mentions it again. Remember your creator. Remember your creator. Remember your creator. Whatever stage in life you're in today, remember your creator. No matter what's going on in your life, remember your creator. God wants to be a part of all of our lives. And I think for us to get the most out of this life and ultimately spend eternity with God, we need to want and invite God to be a part of our lives. What do you got, Andrew?
Just it's like almost come back to the beginning of remembering things under the sun. Life is a vapor that it's not going to last. And what's been sort of like a journey, this whole book of you've seen like under the sun, and if you've lived that way, your life has been a mere vapor. It lasts just for a very short time, and it goes flies away. It goes back to God. But the question is, did you have that relationship with God at the end of the day? Which we will get more into that. What I was also thinking in this section, as it was mentioned about desires. You can imagine all the desires that Solomon had, and they were rather fleeting. There's a reference here that people may, I had to look it up myself, like the caperberry or caperberry is in effect that would in that time be used for help stimulate intimacy or assist, and eventually that goes away. Nothing's effective. You can just think about how much desire and pleasures that Solomon had throughout his life. And you just seeing how all these things as they just slowly depart. Just imagine that how he's reflecting. And hopefully, as we believe that he's writing this, and maybe he's just coming to his senses that all along that, life under the sun, it's not been worth it without having that relationship with God. I mean, that's what the meaning of life is, and getting through this life. And life is just so short. It's like you wake up one day and you're full of vigor, and then the next you're just without strength. You're old and gray, or you're at your final moments. And has reflecting on the life been one that's been truly fulfilling? Is it one that you could look at and say, hey, I lived in such a way that it's not one full of regret. It's not one that was without meaning. It's one that was sought to be pleasing to God instead of just consumed with self. and seeking after the pleasures of life, and that being the sole purpose. And I do like I did think of Jesus on the cross when he uh, asked right before he breathed his last that he commit his spirit back to God. When just makes me think of, in verse 7. I mean, if I could say something similar in my final moments, just thinking and reflecting on God in the positive way, and not just be in my last moments filled with regret that I lived a life full of emptiness, that my life was full of just things under the sun and not looking to the eternal home, focused in on that, focused on pointing others to that direction. That would be truly a vanity of all vanities, of just self-consumed, not looking to the eternal, but just thinking about the here and now only. Any final thoughts before we close?
Solomon makes a strong point of exposing life without God for what it is. And sometimes we can be a little hesitant to do that. We might think, well, we need to be more loving, or, we need to be more merciful or more gracious. And we do need to be loving and merciful and gracious, but we also need to show people what life is like without God. And we need to be willing to say it like it is, and to say, listen, your life without God is meaningless. Your life without God, you have no basis for objective morality. If you believe in something like, I don't know, macroevolution or whatever, we come from sort of goo. Why should I hold people to a different standard than I would to primates? We're the same. So, again, I think there needs to be some degree of candor about life without God. And I think that Ecclesiastes is one of the best places to go to reveal that to people. It's a great evangelistic book in that respect, to sort of expose just the emptiness that there is in a life without God. So it's my 2 cents. I think it's a very evangelistic book, and actually, I'm not the original one. Somebody who kind of I respect, Scott Beyer, said that. He's a preacher over Eastland. He said Ecclesiastes is good because it's a good place to start with people, to reveal to them, your life is meaningless without God. So just admit it, and give your life to God, and you'll have meaning and value.
Anything else you want to add, Chris, before we close?
I think it's interesting what he uses to identify God at the beginning of verse 1, creator, your creator. So God was here before us. God doesn't need me. I think that that's something that I had to accept. God doesn't need me to worship him. God doesn't need me to live a godly life. God doesn't need me to turn my soul over to him. God doesn't need that. God wants that, but God doesn't need that. Um, and you think of our lives, there's a lot of things we think we need, but there's nothing we need or no one we need more than God. So I just think it's interesting that Solomon starts off by saying that about God, not, oh, God, remember God in the days of your youth. Remember your creator. So literally our entire existence is dependent on God. So if my entire existence is dependent on God, then my entire life is dependent on God. And if someone created me in his own image, you would think I would want that individual to be in my life. The individual that blessed me with life, blessed me with the people I have in my life, the abilities that I have, the talents I have, the resources I have. If God's the originator of all those things, Solomon basically says, why would you not want him in your life? And I think a lot of times we tend to push God away. And Solomon did that. So once again, self-reflection, I think in a lot of ways, don't push God away. Invite God into your life. Allow God to be the central part of your life. Life is so much more enjoyable when you have fellowship with God. And you could ask any Christian that, and they tell you that's the truth. I can't imagine what life would be like without God. I mean, there wouldn't be any, but can't imagine what it would be like without having God in my life.
Yeah, I appreciate the um, thought brought out there, because we can, I know I've struggled with this, seeing myself as the center of my own universe, and that is not fact. That's what Satan wants me to think and believe, so I don't leave room to have that relationship with God. My all just thinking about myself, I'm not going to have room for the Creator and see Him as Lord and as sovereign, as the one to be in control. I'm not the one in control. Satan wants me to think that. He wants me to believe that I have all the answers and that I can figure everything out on my own. And that's just not the way things are. Well, we got one more discussion. Probably do some review of just of the book of Ecclesiastes in general next time, Lord willing. I hope that what we've talked about today and in our previous videos have given us a lot to think about. Hopefully challenged us in areas to make sure that to realize that nothing under the sun is going to provide ultimate fulfillment. We will have some enjoyment, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying life, and certainly God wants to have us to enjoy life, but we can't shut him out. He needs to be what we find true life and meaning, and we need to involve him in every aspect of our lives. We need to seek him and seek him diligently. Hopefully we're doing that each and every day. Hopefully we are cracking open up our Bibles and meditate on what is being said and talking to him throughout the day. And what a privilege it is that we have the opportunity to speak with our Creator, that if we seek to know him and do his will, he'll listen to us and listen to our prayers. And that's just an incredible, wonderful thing. It's a gift. We hope that you have that desire to have that relationship if you don't already have that relationship with him. And if you want to reach out to us and to talk about what we've discussed today, or maybe something other than Ecclesiastes, maybe you have questions about other areas of what's talked about in Scripture. Maybe you just want to know what having a relationship with God involves and entails. We just want to make sure that we are on that narrow path that leads to heaven. That when it comes to be our time and when we meet God face to face, we'll be welcome into his home, and it'll be our home for all eternity. And that's the greatest blessing of all. And we just thank you for taking time out of your day to tune in. We hope that you will plan on tuning in next time when we have another episode. But before we close, as a reminder, if you want to reach out to us, because we want to invite just questions, and you can find Chris at the Shavli Church of Christ Facebook page, or Eric or myself at the Taylorsville Road Church of Christ Facebook page, or at Taylorsville RD churchofchrist.com. Please don't hesitate if you have questions or want to ask what having a relationship with God is all about. And so we encourage you to join us next week, Lord willing, when we have another episode of Three Guys and the Word. But until then, may God bless you and take care.